little awkward. I want to talk to you tonight. Thanks to everyone for coming out. I really appreciate it. I've seen faces I haven't seen in a while, and sort of surprising and a very welcome surprise is a friend of mine from high school who grew up with me in Seabrook, Keith Kostick, who's and it's really nice, and it means a lot to me that you came out. I appreciate it. So I want to talk to you tonight about this book. It's called the Black Book of Cyrenaica. And Cyrenaica is a region of Libya. And this book is based on events that really took place back in the first years of the 19th century. In 1805, an American ship, American naval vessel, ran aground here just outside of Tripoli. And the ruler of Tripoli at that time was a sort of a despotic fellow, and his pirates were responsible for a lot of the depredations in the Mediterranean. They were raiding American ships, British ships, French ships, whatever came along. They would seize and rob. And it was a source of a lot of political discontent back in the United States. The Federalist Party, which was the party out of power, was saying to President Thomas Jefferson, the Republican, why can't you do anything about this? We need to have a stronger military response. And Jefferson, a Republican, was very wary of military entanglements. And he was very circumspect about what he wanted to do. He didn't want to spend any money. He didn't want to engage full scale over in the Middle East. So finally, he authorized an embargo, sort of a naval blockade of several ports over here. And he authorized also a strange American named William Eaton to lead a military expedition west from Alexandria across the desert to this little city called Derna, with the notion that he would start sort of a land offensive, and along with the naval pressure on Tripoli would create sort of a second front on the land. And Derna was the first objective. Then, if things worked out, the little army was going to go on to Benghazi, and then finally to march on Tripoli. William Eaton was only able to put together a force of about 300 men. They were mercenaries, mostly Greeks, Egyptians, random folks from the Middle East. And his objective was to put the brother of the ruler of Tripoli on the throne, because the brother was prepared to support American interests. So this expedition set out, and it got to Derna, and that's as far as it got. And this book is sort of a story about that expedition and what happened. And the expedition was led by a detachment of Marines. And we do have at least one Marine in the room tonight, Rick Foley over there. He can vouch for the Marines' stoutness and vigor. And the force was led by 8 Marines. That's all they had. It was sort of the force that kept this whole random army together. And so I wanted to write a little bit. I wanted to tell a little bit of that story, and that's what the book Cyrenaica is about. And again, Cyrenaica is the name of a province of Libya. So I want to read to you from chapter 11. The book features 2 Marines in particular. One is named Lemuel Sweet, and the other his name is Donald McLeish. And the book is sort of about how one of them it becomes scarred by the war over the Middle East and succumbs to sort of his evil nature, and the other one emerges from it with his integrity still intact. And I'm going to read to you. You're going to find out about Private Sweet and McLeish in this passage. And if you have any, we're going to have some time for questions afterwards. Chapter 11 is called Sunlight and Shadow. The next day, the Spanish priest appears at the tail end of the column. Senor Rivera wheezes. He limps. He has wrapped a stained bedsheet around his shoulders, and he shivers while others sweat. It hardly seems credible that he can walk the miles, and yet he does, at first in silence, occasionally glancing sidelong at the 2 Americans, Sweet and McLeish. Aside from his physical infirmities, it is clear that he is uncomfortable in the company of the Marines. His voice, when it comes, is hoarse and difficult to hold in place. The words are a mix of Spanish and English, a smattering of Latin thrown in, and occasional phrases from half a dozen languages besides. There is little small talk. He feels he must tell them important facts about the jinn. Genies, he explains, in response to the puzzled expressions of the Marines. The hidden, creatures of smokeless fire. And why would we give a tinker's damn about that sort of nonsense, asks McLeish. The only thing he hates more than a gentleman is a foreign gentleman. Por favor, says the Spaniard, please, indulge me. According to the Quran, the holy book of the Mohammedans, the jinn eat meat, bones, and dung of animals. They live in communities and are ruled by los reyes, kings, fearsome beings of formidable powers. The jinn bring disaster and death. Although they can survive anywhere a flame can burn, in general they prefer remote and lonely places, deserts, mountains, crypts. They occupy the gaps between shade and sunlight. They are active when darkness first comes. They also like marketplaces, and Rivera advises that it's not a good idea to be the first to enter El Mercado, the market, or the last to leave it. The Spaniard is older, heavy-set, and mostly bald. Sweet supposes he is of peasant stock, as his hands and arms are thick and appear to have seen manual labor. But he is obviously educated, and he seems like the kind of man who is used to having an audience. Private Sweet nods as the Spaniard talks. He is vaguely embarrassed by what he hears. Nonetheless, he would write it down if he could, not because he believes it, but because he is dutiful, and because he suspects that learning the legends of a people is almost as important in understanding them as knowing their language and marital customs. Senor Rivera observes that Colonel Ladendorf often lingers with the camel train. His affinity for Sweet has been noticed. He tells stories, some say, as a way to stay close to his favorite. Sweet ignores the insinuation. Some jinn become attached to human beings, Rivera warns, and function like companion spirits. Indeed, the joining of humans and jinn in marriage is still practiced in some parts of the world. A mixed marriage is capable of producing offspring, though this is not desirable and can in fact be disastrous. The Queen of Sheba, who fascinated King Solomon, was part jinn. She is also said to have had one cloven hoof like an animal, but this is not true. And what of Solomon himself, asked the Spaniard, wiping sweat from his forehead and bushy eyebrows. Sweet shrugs. What of him? It's said he built his great temple with the aid of the jinn, spirits of the air and earth bound to his magical ring, El Anillo, Annulus. They called it how is it said, the seal of Solomon. It had power over all the creatures, mortal and eternal. Sweet has not heard this story. He knows of the Good Samaritan. He is familiar with the Sermon on the Mount. Where he comes from, the Bible is an instruction book, a practical primer for those seeking salvation. Heaven is attainable. It has a sensible oaken door. One must work hard, seek a sound profit, refrain from unwise expenditures. One may then knock with a reasonable expectation of admission. And Solomon was a great king of the Hebrews, as he has recently been reminded, the son of David. Reverend Poole spoke of him from the pulpit one Sunday as blue jays cawed outside. It was spring in Massachusetts and hard to concentrate. The church so knew that Sweet could smell the sap in the beams. The private tries to think back, but can bring nothing about Solomon to mind. Instead, he remembers how Jesus cast out the demons who had taken up residence in the men of Gadarenes. Who are you? Christ demanded of the squatters. We are many, the demons replied. What was the word? Many? No, legion. We are legion. The demons asked the Lord to let them go from the men into the bodies of a herd of pigs nearby, and Jesus allowed it to be so. The animals then threw themselves into a lake and drowned. A victory for Christ or for the undead? Hard to say why the story has come to mind or even what it means. Sweet has not heard of it, or has not thought of it in years. So many of the Bible's tales are embarrassing to a man of learning as he aspires to be, an agent of logic and experience, not superstition. Yet it is hard for him to forget some of the yarns he's heard. His grandmother, his mother's mother, told dark fables about the woods west of the farm. Ghost stories mostly about evil redskins who walked with Old Scratch in life and who were bound to serve him in death, and pure but foolish maidens who strayed from the road to tarry with a handsome stranger. The maidens were never seen again, of course, though their panicked screams could occasionally be heard when the moon was full. Sweet grins as he remembers the sounds of his grandmother mimicking the cries of those lost souls for her wide-eyed listeners. Sweet and his little sister Clara nestled together in bed. No matter how many stories she heard, Clara would always ask for more. Then, when the candles were put out and the fire died down, she'd tuck her head under Sweet's arm and listen to him breathe to help her go to sleep. The night seemed bigger then,
It was a mansion of horrors, dark home to ghosts and fairies and things half seen in the starlight. But a child has a right to indulge in such nonsense. An adult has no excuse. Sweet has read Thomas Paine. He knows of the work of Buffon and Voltaire, though his French will not permit him to read them as he wishes. God exists, certainly, but as the author of immutable laws, a universal clockmaker, not the vengeful and capricious spirit of the Hebrews. Though he understands that vision of the Almighty better here, no trees, no flowers, the heat, everything promising and delicate scraped from the landscape like flesh from bone. In the long miles before him, Sweet sees thin columns of rock rising misshapen and bent like the fingers of some civilization buried whole beneath its ruins and the ruins of those who entered the land afterward. Spires, roofs, and temples swallowed, languages crumbled to dust in the throats of those who spoke them. Earth stuffed in their mouths, they cannot scream. Are the fingers reaching up, intending escape, or are they extended to drag down through the blankets of stone and dust whatever they can reach? Senor Rivera's voice is as harsh as winter beside him. The stocky Spaniard says he has traveled with slavers who made their way through the southern waste to the Bilad al-Sudan and the green lands of Africa beyond. He has seen the rock ramparts of Idenen, fortress of ghosts, near the Wadi Tanazout. Idenen is a mile high, crowned with a castle-like summit. According to the Berbers who live nearby, Idenen functions as a hall of council where the jinn meet to discuss their affairs. Pilgrims have reported hearing strange sounds in the mountain, long keening wails, monotonous but hypnotic chants in a language that seems to run backward, like hymns to some incomprehensible pantheon. Occasionally, human bones are found in lonely places on the slopes, and sometimes the bones are those of children, but the animals who live in this place refuse to touch these remains. Because of such happenings, it is difficult, if not impossible, to get the locals even to look upon the oddly shaped rocks of the peak. But you have looked? I have seen the fortress of ghosts, the Spaniard says. He trembles in the heat. His skin is pale beneath his sparse beard, and his lips are raw and bloody. His appearance suggests a mind that is drifting away from the truth. Are there jinn, where you traveled? Rivera considers Sweet closely. There is something in his gaze that Sweet cannot quite pin down. Is it accusation or an invitation? Even a madman is capable of nuance. Why, asks Rivera, do you want there to be?